Hello, Tar Heel Nation. We're back with another episode. Finally, it feels like it's been a few months here, but we're back. We're the recruiting podcast here. Before we jump into recruiting, just a couple of updates. Right now, the guys are in the Bahamas for a couple of exhibition games. Unfortunately, no live stream, no video coverage. It looks like besides whatever UNC officially puts out on their Twitter, Instagram, anything like that. So that's unfortunate, but they're there. They're going to see some competition besides the alum and each other in practice, so that'll be good, and it'll be good to hear rumors and stuff out of there. A little bit of preseason stuff coming out. Luke May has been named as a preseason All-American. Nassir Little, I'm sure, is going to make some lists, at least as freshman All-American, stuff like that. We'll see if he makes any preseason All-American teams or ACC teams, stuff like that. But great day to be a Tar Heel today. We'll get into that as we get into the recruiting. Big recruitment today. But yeah, we'll get into that. First, introduce Blake from Keeping It Heel here to talk everything recruiting as far as the Tar Heels go. Blake, how's it going?
It's going good. I'm glad to be here. It's been a while.
Yeah, I said it's been a while since I podcast, but it's definitely been a while since we've talked on here. So it's good to have you back. Make sure you guys follow what Blake is doing at keepingitheel.com. Follow him on Twitter. It's Blake KCMO, right?
That's right.
All right. So let's jump right into it, Blake. Let's start with incoming freshmen. We got Nassir Little, highest recruit since I think Harrison Barnes signed with the Heels. We got Coby White coming in, and then we got Leaky Black coming in. What do you expect the impact they're going to make this year on the Heels with, quite a bit of experience coming back?
Well, I think Nasir Little could be the difference in being a title contender and not being a title contender. He's that good. Tremendous athleticism, great offensive player. He can lock down on defense. You may see him guard the other team's best player at times. Now, I think typically that's probably going to go to Kenny Williams. But I think Little's capable, depending on the player and their size. But he's really, really good. And even if he doesn't end up getting a starting position, which I think is very borderline, it's close. I've actually been one of the ones that's saying that he will get a starting position. He's going to
ask you that. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Give me two of them. What would your starting lineup be, and what do you think is going to be the starting lineup opening game?
So obviously there's the two schools of thought on the point guard position. There's Seventh Woods, and then there's Coby White. Coby White has stressed that he's a point guard and that he's not actually a combo guard, and that he's kind of been sort of misrepresented as not being a true point guard. I think he can certainly handle the point guard position. I think it's definitely going to come down to the summer, early fall. What does Coach Williams see in practice? I personally think I would prefer to roll the dice with Coby White. To this point, we haven't seen a lot out of Woods. There's a lot of anticipation, a lot of hype, based largely on a YouTube video. But so far, he hasn't had a lot of consistency. A lot of that has been health issues. So not necessarily things that are his fault, but even when he's gotten on the court, he hasn't been an impact player per se. So I would prefer to go with Coby White, I think, out of the gates. I mean, we've done this before. We've rolled the dice before. We did it with Marcus Page. Things turned out pretty okay with that. Even a guy like Bobby Fraser played point guard as a freshman, and he did pretty well too.
And Kendall Marshall as well when he took over.
So I think that I think it's certainly something where you're going to have to just kind of play out the summer, see how the things go in the Bahamas, see how things go in the early season. I think it's really going to depend heavily on that. Then obviously you've got three starters that are already in the books. Luke May, Cam Johnson, and Kenny Williams are all three obviously going to start with no equivocation, and they certainly should. And then comes the issue of, do you want to play small ball or do you want to play traditional big? Obviously, Coach Williams prefers to play a traditional five. Sometimes he plays two bigs. If you look back at 2005, he had Sean May and Jawad Williams in the starting lineup. Those are two guys over 6'9".
Well, even in Kennedy Meeks and Isaiah Hicks.
Sure, Kennedy Meeks and Isaiah Hicks most recently. In 2009, he had Tyler Hansbrough and Deion Thompson. In 2011, he had Henson and Zeller. I mean, you can go back as far as you can possibly go, and he likes to play at least one big, if not two. Right now, we don't have that luxury. Right now, the only guy that I think that is suited to even consider being a starting position right now is Sterling Manley. And I've said many times over the last few months, I think he's going to take a huge jump this year. I just don't know that it's going to be a big enough jump, and I don't know that it's going to be more worthwhile than having a Nasir Little in there and running small. Now, I personally, I don't like small ball. I would rather go with the traditional lineup. But I think when you've got a guy like Nasir Little, he's an undeniable talent. I think just in terms of what he brings to the team, I think maybe you sacrifice size for the athleticism and the ability to score and that athletic lineup. Granted, I don't really love Luke May at the 5, mostly because of defensive reasons. But I think it's something that we're going to have to see as it develops and see how it goes. I think if he tries to go big and it works out well, then I think he'll stick with it.
Right. And like you said, this Bahamas trips is going to say a lot. Even Cam Johnson, who isn't playing down the Bahamas, his health, we expect him to be back for the opening of the season, but that, plays into it as well. So, all right. So I interrupted you, Nasir Little, all the athleticism, everything we've heard, the hype, and it looks like he can step right in and fill at least part of that hype, depending where you're at on that hype train. But moving on, Coby White, Leaky Black, what you've spoke about Coby a little bit starting possibly, but impact and what you see from them this year.
Oh, I think he's going to be fantastic. And granted, I think that his impact is going to depend on, if Seventh Woods comes in there and just absolutely surprises me and plays terrific at the point, then that's going to certainly change sort of how things play out with Coby White. But I don't think it's going to so much that we just forget about him. I think he's going to be an integral part of the system throughout the year. He's certainly always going to be that backup guy. Now with Rayshawn Black, it's interesting because he's actually a point guard, but this guy's as tall as Luke May.
Right.
So I do have questions as to where he's going to end up. And how many positions he could potentially play. Now, he is a thin guy. He's got a pretty thin frame, doesn't weigh a whole lot. You don't want to have him trying to defend some guy that's 240 pounds and out of position. But I do think he's capable of playing the 1, the 2, the 3. You want to see him try to continue working on that long distance shot. But I think it's interesting. I don't think that he ends up being the full-time starter at point guard. I don't think so, even though he does have a terrific handle.
Yeah. So, a lot to be excited about this year, obviously, with those guys coming in and the hype train keeps going. It just gets better and better to be a Tar Heel. Big day for today. Let's talk about today and the recruitment today. And I'll let you, kind of not breaking it. Everybody's been talking about it already, and it's out there. But what does it mean with it's Armando, and I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, but his commitment to the Heels. What does that mean for next year's class?
Yeah, Armando Bacot. He's just a huge guy. He's 6'10", 240 pounds. He's in my mind, and no disrespect to Joel James, but he's kind of like Joel James, but with a tremendous amount of talent. Just a huge body. And you can't teach size. And we've been kind of missing on these talented big men in recent years. This is the first 5-star front court player we've signed since Tony Bradley. And we weren't getting a whole lot before that either. So, this is a big deal for us, as Tar Heel fans. I think that he has a great amount of athleticism for his size, terrific rebounder. He's a good scorer. He finishes well around the rim. And I think that he's also a guy that may stick around for more than a year. I think that he's at least a 2-year player now. We said the same thing about Tony Bradley. And I was wrong there because I was right there with Ross Martin saying that he was going to stick around for a few years, and that didn't happen. But I do see him as a couple-year player. And I think he's going to be great. You look at the team next year, who you're going to have there. Obviously, you probably lose Nassir Little. So you take away that sort of small ball necessity with him. You lose Luke May, you lose Cam Johnson. So there's a couple of guys at 6'8". Obviously, by next year, if Sterling Manley isn't starting by next year, then something went terribly wrong. So Sterling Manley should be starting. But I think next year you have the opportunity to play that too big thing with Bacot and Manley. I do think that he's going to need to probably work on some post moves and sort of refine his game. But he already, like I said, is a good finisher. He's a great rebounder. He's got good hands. And, and there's also the plus side that this guy plays with a lot of the guys that Roy is currently recruiting. He's trying to himself recruit some guys to come to campus too.
Right. And we'll get into that as we mention those guys coming in. And I don't know what high school he's coming from, but he is transferring to IMG, so he'll play with a couple other targets for the Heels. But it also means the competition he's going to see and, kind of the focus, I would guess, the coaching will help him refine those post moves and help us get back to that traditional. We're going to look really different with Luke May, who can stretch the floor. Even Nassir Little could play some 4 this year and stretch the floor. Cam Johnson, we've mentioned before. And then to go back to 2 bigs, like we're going to, it's going to be traditional North Carolina, but it's going to be different from these past couple of years to next year. But as you're mentioning those guys, Armando already sent out a tweet that he tagged a bunch of our targets in that he was coming for them to get them into Carolina blue as well. But before we get into them, we also have another commit already, a 4-star guy from the same high school as Sterling Manley, Jeremiah Francis, point guard out of Ohio. Recently had surgery. Was it his ACL?
He's had this nagging knee injury, so he had some kind of arthroscopic surgery to repair it. I think it's one of the same injuries that he's already had, okay. Which to me is becoming troubling because he seems very injury prone at this point. So I think getting another point guard in there for that class may be more of a necessity than a luxury at this point.
Well, and he's missing in his entire senior season, correct?
He's missed most of the last year, and now he's going to miss some more. So he returned a few months ago and didn't have a whole lot of opportunity to play before he felt pain. He said something didn't feel right. So he went in to get checked out, and sure enough, a couple of days later, he's having surgery.
Right, and we know how Roy likes to take in multiple point guards anyway. So if Jeremiah could come in and be like a Nate Britt type, Quentin Thomas, just kind of a 4-year backup guy. We've seen how valuable they can be especially when it gets to March and injuries happen, stuff like that. So, but let's jump in now to some of the targets for next year. And just to kind of, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably understand how recruiting and scholarships go, but we get 13 scholarships every year. For next year, we're going to be losing Cam Johnson, Luke May, Kenny Williams to graduation. Like you said, more than likely, Nassir Little, Coby White. People have asked, and I've kind of said it kind of depends on his season. If he comes in and he starts and has a really good year, he could be one and done.
Sure.
But, I would hope that we get 2 out of him. But so that leaves us really only 2 open scholarships if Little leaves with those 3 freshmen with signings of Bacot and Francis. But so as we go through here, keeping that in mind of who we think we can get, who we got the best chances for, and who really we need to be kind of done recruiting. The first one I would say, we need to just leave alone. James Wiseman, top guy in the class, but kind of well documented that he's probably going to Memphis or Kentucky, whoever he picks there, having played for Penny Hardaway in his high school, and his kind of established love for Kentucky there. You agree with me there? Do we need to spend any time on James Wiseman?
Oh, no, he recently said that the Tar Heels were sort of still in his, group of considerables. I don't, however, think that there's a whole lot of point in chasing him, nor do I think that anybody else really needs to bother outside of the 2 teams that you said. I think he ends up at Memphis with Penny Hardaway.
Right. All right, so the next guy down on the list is Cole Anthony, Greg Anthony's son, if you remember him back from UNLV and was it the Knicks? No, it's not the Knicks. Who did he play for in the pros?
Well, he played for the Rockets at one point.
Yeah, I think he traveled around a little bit. But so his son, 5-star point guard, combo guard, it says here, out of Oak Hill Academy. What can you tell us about Cole?
He's probably the best guard in the class. He's a great offensive player. He can shoot it from all over the court. He's got a good handle. Tremendously talented guy. I mean, if you land a guy like that, you know who your starting point guard is.
So what about our chances? Or I know he was in the tweet now that Bacot sent out that he was coming for to recruit him to UNC.
I would love for that to happen. I don't think it does. But maybe, from what I hear, Cole Anthony is interested in North Carolina. I just don't know that it's more than his interest in say, a Duke. I think it would be more likely that he ends up on Duke.
And we know how they like to pull in those top one and done guys. So, all right, up next we got Vernon Carey, a name that's been around quite a while on our target list and a target for Roy and for the Tar Heels. Power forward out of Florida. Florida's been a pretty good, adding Bacot and those other guys that will be at IMG. And Joel Berry most recently out of Florida. I think Tony Bradley as well out of Florida has been good to Roy. What are our chances with Vernon Carey? What kind of player is he?
Oh, he's a great player. The guy's like 6'10", 275. So I mean, he's massive, and he's obviously he put North Carolina in his top 5. I don't think the chances are great. I think it's a lot more likely that he ends up at probably Duke or maybe Michigan State. Tom Izzo has a pretty good relationship with him. He's really pushed hard for Vernon Carey. So I think it's possible. But again, if I were to place my bets, which this isn't going out on a huge limb as you've seen the last 5 or 6 years, but I'd say it's more likely he ends up at Duke.
Right. And obviously Bacot helps us with those big guys. We're going to more than likely have Sterling Manley and Brooks back. Now we got Bacot, Walker Miller still sitting there. It takes away a little bit of that need for those big guys. But here's another power forward. It will be a teammate of Bacot's at IMG, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, still a 5-star guy. And I'll even lump in here as another power forward guy right below him, Matthew Hurt from Minnesota. What can you tell about them? And again, our chances with those guys?
Well, I'm glad that you lumped them in because we can save some time, because I think that there's a high probability that they both end up at Kansas. Obviously, Matthew Hurt, his brother plays for Minnesota, but nobody has ever realistically thought that he was going to end up at Minnesota. But his brother Michael plays there, and that's sort of been the hometown sweetheart of the recruitment. At one point, I think North Carolina was in pretty good standing. I don't think that's necessarily the case now. I think that he's got a really good relationship with Bill Self, and I think that he ends up in Lawrence. And unfortunately, Robinson Earl as well, I think probably ends up there as well. Obviously the history there kind of goes on both sides. So I think that North Carolina has a shot because Roy does have a little bit of history with him. He coached his dad, Lester, at Kansas for a few years. But the younger Earl has also said that his family legacy is going to have absolutely nothing to do with where he commits. But if I had to guess again, I'd say Kansas. The only thing I do question is if one of them signs before the other one. I don't know if that affects whether or not the other one wants to go ahead and still go there. Now that never hurts, Duke or Kentucky.
Right.
But then Kansas doesn't recruit quite the level that those two do. So we'll have to see which one commits first. I honestly, my gut feeling is that Robinson Earl probably commits first, and we'll see what happens with Hurt after that.
All right, so then we move into the 5-star small forwards. The first one's really interesting. This is the name really being connected to Bacot and going after it. IMG, Josh Green. But then also just, again, to kind of lump in the small forwards and the 5-stars here, Keon Brooks out of Indiana and Wendell Moore. Again, a name that's been around a lot, but I think we've kind of lost some favor with here in a North Carolina guy. Predictions on them and what they could add to our Tar Heels.
Yeah, well, as far as Wendell Moore, I think it's a guy that they, have had a really good relationship with. And unfortunately, Roy spent a lot of time recruiting the guy.
Right.
Plays out of Cox Mill in Concord. So, I mean, he's close to Chapel Hill. But I think he is, at this point, as clear-cut to Duke as possible. There was a report the other day from a national recruiting analyst that said that North Carolina was still involved, that North Carolina still had a shot, that the recruitment was still open. But then he also finished the piece by saying he thinks that he goes to Duke. So, I think that's where he ends up, and, good luck to him. Keon Brooks, I don't think there's a shot. I don't even think there's a possibility. I think he ends up probably at Indiana, maybe Michigan State. One of those two schools, I think, have a really good shot at him. Josh Green, though, on the other hand, I think could end up being a tremendous sort of duo with Bacot. I think Green, even without Bacot, pioneering for him to get there, and even without Bacot being at the same school this coming senior year for them, Green was a guy who, before he ever got the scholarship offer from Roy Williams, that he was already interested in North Carolina himself. and has said that he was waiting on a scholarship offer and that he, was interested in playing. So right now, I think that North Carolina probably has a leg up, but I think Arizona's right there. So I think that's going to be a tough one. But I think they absolutely have a shot. And as far as five-star guy goes, I think he's the one of everyone that they've got the best shot at.
So, and a couple of people, when I put out on Twitter that we're going to be podcasting here in questions, people were asking, how does Bacot's commitment influence these IMG guys and even the other guys? Obviously, that sounds nice. They're going to be playing together. They're going to be teammates, and he can be in his ear about coming to Carolina. But really, these top guys, it unless they've established they're going to be a package deal, you can never really count on them, right? Does it affect Josh Green, you think, at all, having Bacot committed?
I don't think it hurts, but I think we've seen way more occasions than not where players, even ones that play together and call themselves friends and teammates for a long time, play AAU ball together. I think we've seen them go separate ways more often than not. So does it hurt? Certainly not. Do I think it necessarily makes it a shoe-in? Definitely not. I think Green, if he ends up on the Tar Heels, it's more because he was already leaning there, not because Bacot. Bacot might be sort of the cherry on top, but I think they've got a good shot at him anyway. But as far as this overarching, does it really change anybody's? I don't think it does, because most of these guys plan on only being in college for 1 year, maybe 2. So the idea of teaming up is cool and it's sort of a novelty, but it's not like an end-all be-all where you're going to be there for 4 years like Joel Berry and Theo Pinson and be roommates for a long time. This is a pit stop.
So another popular question is how Roy handles Nassir Little this year, whether he starts, playing time. Obviously, he's going to get playing time, but does how he handled Nassir Little, you think, affect Josh Green's, or really any recruits going forward, these top, 5-star guys? Does that affect their decision to come to Carolina?
I think it could. And I've written about it a few times that I think the optics here are important. And I think Roy is a guy who typically tries to sort of stray away from what anybody thinks or cares about. I do, however, think that he has at least considered this notion that you get this guy in there that's a potential top pick in the NBA draft. If you don't start him, how does that look to other players in that position moving forward? I think it does have an impact. I think it has an impact not only on getting those players moving forward, but I think it has an impact on Roy's decision. I think he can win the position by skill and talent alone. But then it goes back to that argument of, do you want to play, traditional, with a 5, or do you want to play small ball? So I think that talent wins out, and I think Nasir Little is going to start. I think that they'll probably maybe sort of against Roy's will play small ball, just because the fact that you've already got 3 starters established and you've got a tremendous freshman that, in my mind, has to start because he's that good. And because I think optically it does matter. I think that you see guys sitting here thinking, well, I could go to Carolina, but if you see a guy that is potentially better than you, like Josh Green's thinking, man, Nasir Little's ranked 2nd, and he can't even crack the starting lineup. Why would I? So I think it does matter.
Right. And of course, you have to look at the roster as well. Nasir's coming in behind some seniors, whereas Josh Green would be coming in behind guys that aren't proven. Brandon Robinson won't have been a starter. Some of those guys. So, we'll see how that goes. I believe I have seen that Josh Green said that Carolina was his dream school. So, obviously that doesn't hurt as well. But all right, finishing off 2019 class targets. Will Baker is a name that I haven't heard in a while. I'm guessing we kind of waned on him, a center out of Texas. And then the last guy is a point guard, Trey Mann, again tagged in that tweet by Bacot as someone he's going to be in the ear of to get him to Carolina, point guard out of Florida as well. What do you got on those guys?
Will Baker right now, I think it's down to UCLA, Texas, and North Carolina. I think North Carolina is sliding a little bit simply because of his interest, believe it or not, in film school. Will Baker has this interest in going to film school and being in the film industry, and UCLA obviously can offer him more in terms of the film industry than North Carolina ever could. So geographically speaking, that's a huge disadvantage for the Tar Heels. And I've actually gone, I've said before that if North Carolina, if UNC was smack dab in the middle of Los Angeles, I think he would have already committed, because I think he actually likes North Carolina better. I think it's all the other ancillaries that has him leaning toward UCLA. And of course, the hometown Longhorns are still involved, but I don't think he ends up going there. But, that's, again, kind of been like the sweetheart of his recruitment because he lives right there in Austin. Trey Mann is a guy that I think
this is the point guard we'd need now with the injuries to Francis, right?
I think it's, I would say 60-40. I like the Tar Heels' chances of signing Trey Mann. I think he's shown a tremendous amount of interest in the Tar Heels. I think that he's a guy that could come in and certainly play right away. And obviously that's going to depend on some things too. Does Coby White stick around? Do you keep Coby White at the 1? Does Coby White end up moving over to the 2, and you have a guy like Mann come in and play the 1? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of variables involved there. I do think they have a great shot at getting Mann though. So, I mean, if you look at it like, there's a potential that they end up with, Josh Green, Trey Mann, and Armando Bacot, among others. That's a pretty good class.
Yeah, I mean, we can't argue with taking those guys. And so that leads me right into another Twitter question we got. And I think the answer is pretty obvious. I think most people would agree. But is the Carolina mojo in recruiting, or Roy's mojo, back? Is all that stuff behind us? We're back to where we were recruiting before all that sanction stuff.
It's close. Yeah, I think it's still gonna. Nasir Little obviously is a huge deal, but keep in mind we were signing Nasir Littles yearly before, so I can't go and say that. It's right back where it was. I mean, if you keep in mind guys that we were signing before, I mean, we were getting, top 10 guys like, James Michael McAdoo, Harrison Barnes, guys that were, always 5 stars, multiple 5 stars, Ed Davis, these guys like this. So I think it's close. I think it would help certainly if you sign a guy like maybe Green and you get a Mann, and, if somehow they could, steal a Cole Anthony, that'd be even better. But I think it's close. Yeah.
Well, and we have to remember too about Nassir Little. I don't know, just kind of thinking about this, but if all that stuff doesn't happen to Louisville, it was, it sounded like he was going to be going to Louisville. So we don't know. He's never really spoken on that, but
or Miami or Arizona. I mean, the thing right. is he actually later on he said that it was never a decision that he always wanted to go to North Carolina. I don't know how much I believe that, but I like his tact and saying that.
Right. All right. So, and then again, really quickly, a question we got off of a YouTube listener here. Any chance that Kenny Williams fill-ins at the point from time to time? I just can't see him ever playing the point for Roy Williams, especially with what we have, Coby, 7th, Leaky, even Nasir. I think I would rather see handle the ball over Kenny Williams.
If Kenny Williams is playing the point, something's gone wrong. Because, I would obviously have 7th Woods. Well, he'll probably be injured, so there's that. I'd have Coby White. I'd have Rayshawn Black playing the point before him. There's a number, even KJ Smith. I mean, there's a number of guys I'd certainly have before him. I think he could handle it for short stints. I just question why you would want him to.
Right. All right. So let's move into and quickly go through the class of 2020. Remember, these guys are a couple of years off. It's hard to predict the guys, we were just talking about in 2019 that only have months to decide where they're going. Now we're looking at, the juniors in high school. But before we get into the targets, we have one commitment this year, power forward out of North Carolina, local guy, 4-star, Darren Sharp. This was like the shortest recruitment ever was. Didn't he? If I remember right, he just committed almost immediately when he got the offer from Roy.
This recruitment reminded me of like Isaiah Hicks. Isaiah Hicks, the ink was still wet when he got the offer and he committed. So it was kind of the same thing. And we knew ahead of time that he was extremely interested, and I felt like it was going to be a short period of time once he got the offer before he would accept it. This was a guy that was kind of a slam dunk as far as, Roy getting this commitment. So, yeah.
So what kind of power forward is he? Is he getting more of I don't know much about him. Is he a stretch 4? Is he going to be a, in the paint kind of big?
No, I think he'll be in the paint. The guy's, 6'9", 220 pounds. I think by the time he gets on campus, he may be more of, hopefully 6'10", 240, something like that. Maybe about the size of Bacot, but he is a little thin right now. He's really good. He's a good scorer. He can score in a variety of ways. He's a pretty good leader. He passes well. He's a smart player, and he's a pretty good rim protector. So I think that he's a guy that's got potential to be really good. And I think by the time it's all said and done, you may see him rise in the rankings a little bit over the next year or so.
All right, and so moving into the targets, and I admittedly don't follow recruiting really closely. I hardly recognize any of these names. The big guys that were targeted, the 5-star guys, center Walker Kessler and power forward Isaiah Todd. I don't know. Like I said, we'll go through this kind of quickly, but anything you want to say about those guys?
So Roy's put in some time recently with Kessler, and I think they've developed a pretty decent relationship. I can't speak too much to the details of that. I know that there's a long time to go in his recruitment, but that he's a talented player and that Roy's definitely putting in the time. I can say with Isaiah Todd, this is a guy that's been getting recruited since he was about 6, because I think he's been 6'10" for like a decade. But I think that North Carolina's got a decent shot. With Isaiah Todd, he's a good player. He is really thin. He's kind of a little bit of a John Henson type when John Henson got to campus, tall. He's got the ability to play some defense. He's got a really good wingspan, 6'10", 195 pounds. So, he'll blow off the court with a strong breeze. But certainly a talented player that they've got a shot at. I think Kansas also has a pretty good shot at him right now, but it's early in the recruitment. Anything could happen.
Right. And I was going to say, just to remind anybody listening to this is like targets. They're on the radar. There's not offers on the table to all these guys. I don't know if there's even offers to any of these guys. You can maybe mention that if you know as we go through here. But other 5-star guys in the 2020 class: small forward Scotty Barnes out of Florida, small forward Jalen Johnson out of Wisconsin, shooting guard Jalen Green out of California, and shooting guard Anthony Edwards out of Georgia. Anything on any of those guys?
So Jalen Green right now is the #1 guy in the class. Really good player, great shooter, good size. He's got, he's 6'5" and like 170 pounds. So, he's a really good player. He's probably going to be a one and done. Roy's been putting in some time with him. He's watched him play. He's talked to him. Can't say for sure how that's going. I know that he's trying to get Nasir though and build that relationship. Barnes is a talented forward. He's a good wing. He's not a guy that I think ends up at North Carolina. I think he probably ends up, he's a Kentucky or a Duke guy maybe. And I'm just throwing that out there because I truly have no idea, but that's just the kind of the guy he strikes me as. And then, Jalen Johnson again, another small forward is really good. I have no clue where he's going.
All right, and then finishing off the class of 2020 with the 4-star guys, we got center Hunter Dickerson out of Maryland, actually DeMatha Catholic High School, and then power forward Mark Williams out of Virginia, and shooting guard Jaden Springer, a local guy out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Anything to add on those 3?
Well, Williams, we've heard about Mark Williams for a while. Roy was talking to him, during the last season. So he's a guy at one point I had kind of pegged as, this feels like a North Carolina commit, kind of the ones that we've been getting recently now. If we're going to start getting guys like Armando Bacot every year, then maybe that'll sort of not happen as much. We'll kind of move away from those Brandon Huffman and Sterling Manleys of the world and start getting back to the John Hensons and Tyler Zellers. But he's a guy I could see ending up at North Carolina. He's a good player, he's a solid player. Right now he's like a top 40 player. And it depends on the rankings that you look at. And then Dickinson's a good player. I don't know a whole lot about him. I haven't watched him play a whole lot. And then Springer, as far as I know, is a pretty good shooter. He's a knockdown shooter. But can't say a whole lot more than that.
All right, and that pretty much wraps up our recruiting, our annual recruiting podcast. Obviously, this is a pretty exciting one coming off on the heels of the commitment today. It really does feel like we're getting right back there as far as recruiting goes. We're right back in. I mean, we've been to 2 championship games now. We got the recent championship in 2018. A lot of potential for this year. Obviously, people thinking possible Final Four potential. If we can get that big class next year, we're right back in next year. So great time to be a Tar Heel, of course. Really exciting. Blake, I want to thank you for coming on. We got to do this more often. We can't wait a whole year.
Absolutely.
Get back on here.
Yeah, no, I'm ready. And it is a great time. And I think that the importance of 2019's class can't be understated, because when you think about who you're losing this year, you're probably losing 4 starters. So I think you've got to make a huge splash with 2019 and with guys that are potentially ready to come in and play immediately. Because, like you said, I don't know if a guy like Brandon Robinson is going to be ready to have play 32 minutes a game next year. I don't know. I hope so. I hope this year he really takes that next step. But just in case he doesn't, I think we need to have a whole lot of guys in there that are ready to come in and play immediately.
Right. And obviously football is about to start here, but, basketball is right around the corner as well. As far as the podcast go, we'll be getting into, looking at the schedule a little more in depth, looking at player predictions as far as our roster this year. We'll obviously be looking at anything that comes out of the Bahamas trip here and when we start practice and stuff. So exciting time to be a Tar Heel. And I'm ready for college basketball. Let's watch a little bit of football and get right into basketball. So that's all we got for you this month. I'll see you guys next month with some more Tar Heel news, some getting us ready for the season. But Blake, thanks for joining me, guys. Make sure you go follow his stuff at keepingithealed.com. Follow him at Twitter, Blake KCMO. That's all I got. Blake, you got anything to sign off with?
It's my pleasure to be here, man. We got to do it again.
All right, we'll do it sooner than we did last time. So until next time, guys, go Heels.